Hello my dear friends, you're in the Military Summary channel, and today we will discuss the situation in Ukraine on the 8th of May of 2025. Today we have a lot of very interesting updates, so let's start. And today the most important updates are coming from Moscow. A lot of leaders, strong and powerful leaders today are coming to Russia, to Moscow with the purpose to meet with Putin and all together to be on the parade on the 9th of May. And probably the most important meeting is the meeting between the Chinese leader and the president of the Russian Federation. In this video, we can see the Chinese leader Xi Jinping arriving in Moscow on an official visit that will last until May 11th. Later and during the day, we got a lot of different statements, lots of different articles regarding this meeting. In this video, we can see Putin and Xi Jinping meet in the Kremlin. Russia and China have equal, mutually beneficial and non-opportunistic relations, the Russian president said. Putin stressed that he would be happy to visit China to celebrate the anniversary of the victory over militarist Japan. The sacrifices of the peoples of Russia and China in World War II are worth never forgetting. The governments of Russia and China are working to implement the entire array of agreements. The parade calculation of Chinese troops at the May 9th parade in Moscow will be the largest of all foreign troops. Xi Jinping said that he was very happy to take part in the celebrations on the occasion of the 80th anniversary of the victory. China is ready to defend the truth about the history of World War II with Russia. Very important statements were made by China and by Russia during, talks. Russia and China outlined plans for further work in the future at the talks. Moscow intends to create comfortable conditions for the activities of Chinese companies in Russia. Russia welcomes the creation of and transfer of Chinese production facilities to its territory. The foreign policy link between Russia and China in the international area is a stabilizing factor. Energy is a driving force behind the relations between Russia and China. Putin is confident in the future development of cooperation between the Russian Federation and China for the benefit of the peoples of the two countries. So very warm meeting, very important meeting. And this is not the first and not the last meeting that took place or is going to take place during the next 24-48 hours. Lots of leaders have already arrived on the territory of the Russian Federation, but you know that not everything is so smooth and good for different leaders. For example, today we have another scandal from the European Union. According to information we have, that the Baltic states closed the airspace for the Prime Minister of Slovakia. Fico administration seeks alternative route to Russia after Baltic airspace closures. So this is a very big scandal. We see that, and according to information we have, Robert Fico was planning to visit Russia through the territory of Poland, then through the territory of Baltic states, and then he was planning to enter the territory of the Russian Federation. But according to information we have, Baltic states closed the airspace, and now Fico tries to find another way how to enter Moscow and how to join this team on the parade on the 9th of May. So all these things are happening because Russian Federation several days ago announced ceasefire. And today the Minister of Defense of the Russian Federation gave us some report regarding this ceasefire. So the Russians reported that the Russian armed forces strictly observe the ceasefire. In particular, no strikes are carried out by aircraft, missile forces and artillery, and of course drones. Despite the announcement of the ceasefire, the formations of the armed forces of Ukraine did not stop conducting military operations against Russian troops. They made 2 attempts to break through the state border of the Russian Federation in the Kursk region, as well as an attack in the area of the settlement of Dzержinsk in the Donetsk People's Republic. So the Russians reported that a total of 488 ceasefire violations were recorded. Now let's move to the ground and let's discuss these violations in details. And first let's talk about the Tyotkino direction, where the Ukrainians probably the 4th day in a row are trying to break the Russian lines and to take this small settlement under complete control. And as for the end of the 8th of May of 2025, we see some changes on the ground. And according to them, we see that Ukrainians most likely managed to break through the Russian defense and to answer the village of Tyotkino from the southwest and from the southeast. So let's discuss this in details. First, let's talk about the southwestern direction. The first adjustments of map we got yesterday based on this video that was published by the Russian side. In this video, we can see how Russians were bombing Ukrainian positions in the most southwestern part of the settlement. Based on this video, yesterday, lots of mappers made adjustments on their maps. Furthermore, several neutral resources reported that the Russians were forced to fall back from the area of the railway station. And as for the end of the 8th of May, we have additional changes. For example, today, according to information we have, the Russians were forced to fall back from the railway station completely. In this video, we can see how Russians were bombing positions of the armored forces of Ukraine along the railways, probably trying to force them to fall back, or at least to force them or to slow them down. The Ukrainians continued their offensive operation in the northeastern direction. At the same time, the Russian sources published this video, and here we can see how several infantry fighting vehicles and tanks of the armored forces of Ukraine managed to break the border, to break the fence belt, and to enter the settlement of Tyotkino from the southeast. In this video, we can see how the Russians were bombing and attacking Ukrainians, how they were bombing Ukrainian positions and temporary deployment points on the territory of the settlement itself. So several episodes were geolocated from that video, and one of the positions was discovered exactly in this point. So we have adjusted the map, and now we see that Ukrainians currently are trying to attack the settlement of Tyotkino using these roads of attack, and Ukrainians are trying to attack the settlement using these roads of attack. As for now, it's very difficult to understand what exactly is going to happen next, and the most important question I have, whether the Ukrainians are planning to continue their offensive operation with the purpose to establish control over the settlement of Tyotkino after the 11th of May, or this attack and this show is just for the next 3 days, and after the 11th of May, the Ukrainians would be forced to fall back. Anyway, maybe this question is not so important. Probably the most important thing that now the Russians see that Ukraine and Ukrainians and Zelensky are not ready for ceasefire, for long-term ceasefire. And most likely, and probably I'm sure for 90%, that after the end of the ceasefire, the Russians will continue the special military operation. Furthermore, according to information we have, the Ukrainians attacked the settlement of Lushkovo with HIMARS missiles. In this video, we can see the consequences of Ukrainian attack. Most likely, the Ukrainians were attacking the settlement because they discovered another temporary deployment point of the Russian forces, but this is the violation of ceasefire, using the Western weapon and using the Western weapon of HIMARS system. Very important violation that most likely the Russians are going to use. At the same time, the Ukrainians are not reducing their pressure on the line between the settlements of Pavlovka and Novoput. Today we got additional videos how Ukrainians were trying to cross the border using armored vehicles and tanks, and all these vehicles, as you can see, were damaged and destroyed by the Russians. Anyway, now we are not going to be surprised if during the next several days we will receive additional changes on the ground in Ukraine's favor. So as for now, the Russians are trying to slow down the Russians and to stop them with the purpose not to allow the Ukrainians to ruin the anniversary, the 80th anniversary of great victory that the Russians are celebrating right now on the territory of the entire Russian Federation. Now let's move further. Let's talk about the Sumy direction. As for this area, most likely both the Russians and the Ukrainians follow ceasefire that was declared by the Russian Federation. But one important thing that today we have several changes, but according to different mappers and different sources, all these changes and all these advances were made by the Russians before the beginning of this ceasefire. So as you can see, according to information we have, during the previous 24 hours, during the previous 48 hours probably, the Russians managed to improve their positions on the line between the settlement of Oleshnya and the village of Loknya. Now we see that the Russians are planning to continue offensive operation, and most likely the next target and the next task of the Russians is to establish complete control over the forest of Bezemenna and over the forest of Voskobina. So they will try to take this territory, and this will allow the Russians to begin a major offensive operation in the direction of the settlement of Yunakivka. But obviously, this is going to happen after the end of ceasefire. Now let's move further. And let's discuss the situation in the Kharkiv direction. Today, the Ukrainian sources made adjustments on their maps. And according to these adjustments, the Ukrainians, as a result of counterattack, managed to restore their positions in the vicinity or between the settlements of Liptsy and Gluboka. So this huge forest, according to Ukrainian sources, was recaptured by the Ukrainians during the previous several days. Most likely, clashes in this area continue. The thing is that if Ukrainians restore control over this forest, let's say yesterday, obviously the Russians will not follow any ceasefire and they will try to counterattack with the purpose to restore control over this strategical position. So most likely there are very heavy clashes right now on the territory of this area. Now let's move further and let's discuss the situation in the Liman direction. According to information we have, during the previous 24 hours, the Russians improved their positions significantly. First of all, the Russians improved their positions to the southwest of this from the settlement of Lipovo. Now we see that the Russians are trying to outflank the settlement of Zelena Dolina from the northwest. It's very difficult to understand whether the Russians are planning to continue this operation during the ceasefire period of time, but obviously they are going to do this after the 11th of May. As for the northern direction, we see Russian attempts to maintain the lines and to shorten the lines between the settlements of Novovodiane, Makiivka and Karamzinovka. So the Russians are just trying to improve their logistic and to get as close as possible to the settlement of Grekovka. Today, pro-Russian resources published this video where we can see several Russian stormtroopers that were heading towards Ukrainian positions. Ukrainians were trying to slow down and to stop the Russians with artillery strikes and mortar strikes, but the Ukrainians couldn't do this. The Russians reached the destination and established complete control over this tree line. Based on this video, we have adjusted the map and we have colored this territory in Russian favor. As for the Seversk direction, the Russians continue their offensive operation despite declared ceasefire. We continue receiving videos how the Russians were bombing and attacking Ukrainians and positions of the armored forces of Ukraine on the territory of the Serebryanka forest. We see that the Russians are getting closer and closer to the river of Seversky Donets, and this is going to be very important. This is very important for the Russians because now the Russians are focused in tightening the news around the city of Seversk itself and around the northeastern direction of the Seversk foothold. Furthermore, according to information we have, during the previous 24 hours, the Russians improved their position significantly, trying to outflank the settlement of Verkhnykamensk from the north and northwest. The Russians most likely are going and are planning to take under control the most western part of the settlement with the purpose to cut Ukrainians from supply and support and to force them to fall back. This is a very important battle because if the Russians can take under control the village of Verkhnykamensk completely, then the distance between Russians' positions and positions of the armored forces of Ukraine on the territory of Seversk would be less than 4 kilometers. And as you can see, there is a road between these two positions, and the Russians most likely will try to use these benefits to attack the city of Seversk as soon as possible. So we believe that maybe when talking about May, we are not going to see the battle of Seversk, but obviously this summer the Russians will begin their offensive operation in this direction. Of course, there are some chances, maybe not so big, but maybe small chances that Russians will prolong ceasefire after the 11th of May, but it's very difficult to believe this. Now let's move further. As for the city of Chasiv Yar, the Russians continue their offensive operation. But when talking about the previous 24 hours, most likely both the Russians and the Ukrainians were following and are going to follow this ceasefire. We have a lot of videos, but most likely all of them, all these attacks were made by the Russians before the beginning of declared ceasefire. As for now, we don't have any changes on the ground. Another important thing is the city of Troitske. As for now, we don't have even a single icon from this area, but I'll remind you, according to the report that was published by the Minister of Defense of the Russian Federation, the Ukrainians made 2 attacks. One of them took place in the vicinity of the settlement of Tyotkino, and we have already discussed this, and another attempt to counterattack took place in the area of Dzerzhinsk in the Donetsk People's Republic. Republic. Dzержinsk is the city of Toretsk. So according to pro-Russian resources and according to the Minister of Defense of the Russian Federation, during the previous 24 hours, the Ukrainians carry out several counterattacks in this area. As for now, we don't know for sure whether the Ukrainians managed to improve their positions or not, but maybe the next several days or maybe tomorrow we will adjust the map in the vicinity of the city of Toretsk in Ukrainian favor. Once again, we don't know for sure where exactly the Ukrainians were counterattacking, but probably Ukrainians were trying to restore complete control over this mine, and maybe the Ukrainians were counterattacking in the area of southern Avdiivka. So let's wait and see what is going to happen. Now let's move further. As for the Kliban-Bykska direction, according to information we have, both the Russians and the Ukrainians were following ceasefire. And right before declared ceasefire, the Russians managed to improve their position significantly. And this information also confirmed by the pro-Ukrainian sources. According to Deep State, the Russians secured the settlement of Alexandropol completely. So Ukrainians were forced to fall back. And this is very important because now the Ukrainians need to think how to create their defense on the line between the settlements of Zarya, Gnatovka, Stara Nikolaevka, and Romanovka. So currently this is the main chain of defense of the armed forces of Ukraine. And probably if the Russians were attacking this area, let's say from the southwestern or from the southern or from the southeastern direction, then most likely the Ukrainians would be able to hold their positions for a very long period of time. But the main problem for the Ukrainians is that the Russians began advancing along reserves in the direction of Yablunovka. And during the previous 24 hours, the Russians managed to improve their positions. And the Russians managed to improve their positions in this direction also before declared ceasefire. So now we see that the Russians most likely are not going to attack this pocket from the southern directions. Most likely the Russians will try to attack this pocket from the northwestern direction with the purpose to establish complete control over something like this. If the Russians are able to do this, then from these positions the Russians would cut and establish complete fire control over the main supply lines that go in the southern direction, and the Ukrainians would be caught in collar, or at least would be caught in pincers. So maybe this is the reason why the Ukrainians counterattacked in the Toretsk direction, because now Ukrainians are trying to maintain supply through the Kliban-Bykska water reservoir and the settlements of Shcherbenovki, Novospassky, Katerinovka, and Kliban-Byk itself. So very interesting picture. As for now, it's very difficult to understand whether the sides are following the ceasefire or not, but most likely due to the fact that Ukrainians attacked Russian positions, most likely the Russians are not going to follow any ceasefire in this area, and the Russians will continue their offensive. Obviously, the Russians will continue their offensive in the area of Novopoltavka. During the previous 24 hours, we got several videos that were published by the Ukrainians where we can see how Ukrainians were attacking Russian units on the ground. So it's very difficult, hard to believe and hard to imagine that the Russians and the Ukrainians can stop offensive and battle for the Novopoltavka, because the situation here is like several buildings on one line under complete Russian control, several meters, let's say, to the north, several buildings under complete Ukraine control. So it's very difficult to imagine how soldiers on the ground can stop this battle. So most likely the battle for Novopoltavka will continue despite declared ceasefire. As for the city of Pokrovsk, today we got reports that the military of 3 units of the Ukraine armed forces from the Pokrovsk direction and from the south stated that they had received an order to open only return fire. The Ukraine armed forces received a similar order during the Easter truce, which was declared by Putin, but they themselves constantly violated it along the entire front. So when talking about the city of Pokrovsk, we have lots of proofs, both from the Russian and from Ukrainian side, that there are no clashes in this area, that both the Russians and the Ukrainians are following ceasefire. But when talking about Novopavlovka or the Dnipro direction, we see here completely different picture. The Russians continue their offensive operation, and for example today the Minister of Defense of the Russian Federation reported that as a result of clashes, the Russians established complete control over the settlement by the name of Troitske. So let's compare the map between the dates. This is the situation by the end of the 7th of May, and this is the situation by by the end of the 8th of May. The entire village was taken, and according to different mappers, according to several pro-Russian resources, and according to neutral mappers, the Russians managed to outflank the settlement of Gorokhovo from the east and to approach the settlement from the north. So we believe that the Russians are not going to stop any ceasefire in this area, and that the Russians are going to continue. Furthermore, several sources reported that it seems that according to number of updates, according to violations of ceasefire, some sources reported, who is familiar with the situation on the ground, that it looks like neither the Russians nor Ukrainians heard anything about any ceasefire. Clashes in this direction is very heavy, and we can understand the situation because this is the border between regions, and the Russians managed to get to this border as close as never. Currently, the distance between edge positions of the Russian forces and Ukrainian and the border itself is less than 2 kilometers. Is less than 2.5 kilometers. So, for example, this is the distance, and obviously this is this is the distance of one day or one night clashes. So there are very high chances that tomorrow, on the 9th of May, the Minister of Defense of the Russian Federation will show some video or some picture with Russian soldiers who will wave Russian flags somewhere in this area. And this is exactly what the Ukrainians can't allow. So that is why the Ukrainians will send more and more troops in this direction, with the purpose to stabilize this area. Furthermore, according to several sources, the Russians improved their positions in the fields. So this was expected. We expected this because the Ukrainians, these positions are very big for Ukrainians. They need to optimize their, let's say, defense lines. So this is the reason why most likely Ukrainians abandoned these positions and got as close as possible to Alexeyevka. So we see that this direction is collapsing, and most likely in the very near future the Ukrainians would be forced to fall back from this area, despite the fact that the Ukrainians have strong control over the settlement of Bogatyri. Most likely previous attempts from the Russian side to answer and to take under control the southeastern part failed. Probably the Russians have some positions in the most southeastern part of the settlement, but it probably doesn't change anything. Ukrainians have strong control over the settlement, and most likely the Russians will resume their offensive operation only after the 11th of May. At the same time, the Russians changed their tactics, and according to several reliable pro-Russian resources, the Russians decided to move in the northwestern direction from the settlement of Razdolne. The Russians are trying to advance this way with the purpose to take Otradno under complete control and to cut N15 road. So as you can see, several pro-Russian resources reported that probably currently the armed forces of the Russian Federation already have established complete over something like this, which is obviously the beginning of the end for Ukrainian positions in Alexeyevka and Bogatyri. And maybe the Ukrainians decided to fall back from these fields because now they see very huge risk and very big danger situation in the vicinity of Otradno. As for the Zaporozhye direction, as we understand, both the Russians and the Ukrainians follow announced ceasefire, declare ceasefire. Probably all videos that we got from this area today were made before this ceasefire. So anyway, the situation is very calm. As for the Kherson direction, today we haven't received anything regarding Russian positions or work of Russian sabotage and reconnaissance group on the Ukrainian side of the river of Dnipro. We have just several videos how the Russians were trying to destroy the positions of FPV drone operators. But most likely all these videos were made before declared ceasefire. Another important update is coming from Ukraine. Today, according to information we have, Ukrainians supported ratification of agreement with the United States of America. So this is very important because, as you know, the Second World War, the Germany defeat, according to European calendar, ended on the 8th of May. So on the 8th of May, according to Europeans, according to the United States of America, the World War in Europe ended. And you know that this is very interesting. Today, Ukrainians signed this agreement with the United States of America. Probably Ukrainians were trying to make some damage, media damage to the Russian Federation. But as for me, it's looked like capitulation. It's looked like a capitulation that took place in 1945. But this time we see capitulation. Also Ukraine, but probably in front of the Western countries. And that's it for today. Military Summary channel reminds we condemn any violence in the world. Thank you for watching. Subscribe to my channel, put your likes, join my Patreon, and have a good day. Bye bye.